Hi, this is Anita from 5 Minutes with Art. Today we're going to talk about another great artist. In fact, one of my other favorite artists, an artist that I really appreciate and love, is Georgia O'Keeffe. Georgia O'Keeffe is often called the mother of American modernism. One reason why I really relate to Georgia O'Keeffe is she's from Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. She's a Wisconsin girl. I'm a Wisconsin girl. So together we have that in common. From an early age, she had a keen interest in art, often sketching and painting as a child. She had a formal education of art, began at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1905 and later at the Art Students League in New York City. During this time, she began to master traditional realistic techniques. However, feeling constrained by the rigid approach to art, she sought new ways to express herself. And so she began to really break barriers early on. She was somebody who was not afraid to sort of push the limit, break the barriers. And her real journey towards modernism began in 1915 when she created a series of abstract charcoal drawings that broke away from traditional representation. These works were characterized by flowing lines and organic shapes and, marked as the emergence of a unique style. And this was really quite revolutionary for this time for an artist like her to be able to do this. She began to then experiment by the 1920s with color and scale and produced a lot of the great works during this time, like Black Iris 3 and the Red Canna. In 1929, she moved to New Mexico. And, New Mexico at this time in 1929 must have been a pretty, maybe not as modern as some of the eastern part of the United States. But, this trip, her going to New Mexico, profoundly influenced her art and life. And so she went to visit on a trip in 1929 in New Mexico and began to influence her. And then she began splitting her time between New York and New Mexico, eventually making her the home permanent in 1949. So it took her about 20 years or so to really permanently move to New Mexico, but she spent the 20 years going back and forth to the Southwest area. That's why you see a lot of her work sort of has this Southwestern type of feel to it. Everything from the ram's head skull to to some of the flowers and the other things. Some of the major themes in her work of art, include things as nature and abstraction. She had deep connection to nature is evident in her work and her love for nature, from flowers to desert landscapes. But at the same time, she'd use vibrant colors and dynamics compositions, changing the natural perspectives, in art. Scale and perspective was another one that she did. This huge scale of magnifying flowers and bones to these huge monumental proportions she would use in her artwork. She'd use feminism and individuality was one of them too. She often resisted the labels being known as a feminine artist. But her career and her work, there's no doubt about it that Georgia O'Keeffe broke a lot of barriers for women artists. She was navigating a male-dominated art world. She was breaking barriers in art itself and also breaking barriers as a female artist. She truly was, in so many ways, a remarkable woman who wasn't afraid to break the barriers. She wasn't afraid to try new things. She wasn't afraid to experiment with art and other things like that. She really was not afraid of that. She saw that, in fact, she saw it as probably in many ways as an opportunity. If you're ever like in Santa Fe, New Mexico, you can go there and there's a Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, a wonderful museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The museum houses over 3,000 pieces, including paintings, drawings, and personal artifacts, and offers a visitors a comprehensive view of her artistic journey. So if you ever are in Santa Fe, do stop in and see the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. Her art, reminds us all to slow down and look at the beauty around us because her art focused so much on nature and individuality and self-expression that Georgia O'Keeffe really taught us that, you just slow down, look at art, look at the nature around you. She remains a symbol of creativity and resilience and innovation, and her legacy continues to live on, not only in museums and galleries, but also in the hearts of many Americans. I know for myself personally, I love her. I really appreciate her. She's definitely one of my favorite American artists. Thank you so much for listening with 5 Minutes with Art. We hope that you've enjoyed this 5 minutes to learn something about this extraordinary woman, Georgia O'Keeffe, who certainly does deserve our respect. We have written a blog post on it, which is called The Life and Legacy of Georgia O'Keeffe, Mother of American Modernism. We'll put a link in the description if you'd like to be able to check out some more about her and see some of her actual works of art. Thank you so much for listening and being part of our community.